I do think it's funny where how mean people can be on the internet, and people are like, "Oh, these guys, I hate them," and I'll just like chime in and be like, "You're talking to a human right now. You realize that, right?" Like,
Okay, well, we'll just jump right in then. I can imagine you're pretty busy right now. I've seen Crown Lands has some scheduled, um, I was going to say vacation days. It's not vacation days, it's touring days. Vacation's
yeah,
probably over.
you could call it a bit of a vacation. We're starting off with Cruise to the Edge next week, and um, man, we're stoked about that. But it's our first time doing a fly gig in a really long time. And as I'm sure you know, the landscape of flying as a progressive rock band has changed dramatically. So we can't really afford to freight all of our equipment down to the port of Miami where the cruise takes off. And so we're checking a lot of our gear. And another thing we know, progressive rock was never meant to be compact. And somehow we figured out how to get our whole rig into about 4 or 5 flight cases, so that way we can backline the rest of the gear on the cruise. And luckily, the backline company we're working with, they're providing it for Marillion and Queensryche and Steve Hackett, and so they all of our outlandish requests are being met with thumbs up, which is lovely. So we don't have to bring a lot of the gear that we normally have to truck around, and so we're able to, um, get away with only 4 flight cases, and I'm pretty excited about that because, as you know, when you play in a progressive rock band in 2026, you have to do a lot of things yourself. So I'm not just, writing and producing the music. I'm also tour managing the band and figuring out all the logistics. And that in its own right is its own full-time job. So I've kind of been doing that over the last 2 weeks. On top of promoting our new 19-minute single about, the end of a planet and also I've been learning how to program uh, non-registered parameter numbers. And Dean, I don't know how much of a MIDI nerd you are, but a non-registered parameter number is essentially understanding that MIDI has 128 possible destinations and 128 possible values of said destinations. And the NRPN is exponentially stacking those two messages together to create a binary number and then converting that binary back into a decimal and basically calculating 4 MIDI messages on top of each other to send one piece of information. And so it's essentially now it's 128 squared. And so now instead of having a 28 destinations, you have 16,000 destinations and 16,000 possible values. And so you have a much higher resolution. And of course, that's the language that my Oberheim synthesizer requires me to talk to it in order to uh, trigger sequences on and off with an external MIDI controller. And so for this fly gig, I've had to figure out how to do that. And so I've been calculating uh, MIDI numbers into binary and back in order to communicate all of my MIDI messages together. And so that has been a big head expanding process that I've been doing for the last week as well. So it's all working though, which is exciting. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
I got excited when I saw some of your gigs and I'm watching you play those Taurus foot pedals and stuff. That's so cool. I love the analog sound too. They're analog, of course, right?
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Me too, man. I'm a big sucker for big fat analog synths, and nothing quite
Hmm.
moves the air the way an analog synth does, like the old Taurus pedals or a Mini Moog or an Oberheim. And it's funny, I was drag kicking and screaming into the digital modeler world. A few years ago, we toured with Kiss, and they were gracious enough to haul our gear around for us because we couldn't afford a bus, so we were following them in a rented RV, and we didn't have enough room for our equipment, so we trucked it out to Vancouver where the first show was, and they threw our gear in the back of one of their 24 trucks that they had on the road. And but the situation was I couldn't afford to truck my wet dry wet rig at the time, which was I had an old 65 Fender Bassman for my dry and two sets of high watt 504s for my wet rig, and it sounded glorious, Dean. Let me tell you, I still use that in the studio. It always puts a smile on my face. But the realities of that tour meant I was going to have to use a Line 6 Helix for my guitar tones, and I didn't hate it. I really enjoyed being able to have the consistency night to night, because as a guitar player, I'm sure you know, when you're touring with tube amps, as the humidity changes, as the voltage in the room changes, the sound you loved and felt great under your fingers one night, and you get into a different room and it doesn't quite translate, and you're bummed and you're playing with knobs all night. And whereas with the modular world, you turn it on and it works, and there's no warm up time, and it's good. And so I actually found, because for years ago, like I play, I'll bust this out. I've got a couple of custom double necks made, right? And so it's
Oh,
wired
nice.
TRS, right? So I can run my entire show off of one stereo cable, and I have a couple of custom breakout boxes made that split the signal into two TS cables. So that way, as my right foot is playing the Taurus, my left foot can switch whatever neck I'm playing, so I don't miss a beat. Because I'm sure you find most bands with double necks, you have a bass player or a guitar player or a keyboard player to back you up, and that one beat change, switch between necks with the foot with a hand switch. I'm not afforded that, because in Crownlands we have two rules: no click tracks, no backing tracks live. It's all, if you're hearing it, one of us is making that sound happen. And so I had to come up with a solution to be able to switch between necks without missing a beat. And um, basically for years, the bass has gone through a Sans amp rig, right? Like I just use one of those Getty Sans amps with a clean and a dirty signal. Whereas for the guitar side, I was very incessant on using my amplifiers, and it came up to the point where I was running like a bunch of powered speakers behind me, so that way, my guitar rig was going through tube amps and 412s, and the bass rig was going through powered speakers, and so was my synth rig. And I just had to think to myself, like, if I'm already hauling all this gear, I may as well cut down on the cabs and switch to the modular system for the guitars. But I'm still analog all the way for my synth rig, because I feel like the weight that Taurus pedals have, I still have yet to find a plugin that moves air the way Taurus pedals do. Although I did just buy the Cherry Audio Lowdown, which is like it's a Taurus VST for like, it was like $30. I had to buy it, and it's close. It's really close. I don't know if it's gonna move speaker, if it's gonna move air the same way through a 30,000 watt PA system. So um, I think I just have too much of a prejudice against laptops on stage right now. It's I get nervous about that. I don't know if, like, do you gig with a laptop ever, Dean?
Um, well, I was in a band in the 80s, and we were like the first band in Canada to be using a computer. The
Oh,
bass
cool.
player, the bass player was kind of like a Geddy Lee version of like he was like Geddy Lee basically. He had a keyboards, he had a bass and a double neck bass actually, fretless and fretted. And then he
Cool.
had this little computer which had a floppy card, and that's how he loaded the floppy card before the song, and then he played the song. And of course, our Sandman spilt a beer on it one night, so we had one less
Oh.
song for our set list for the rest of the tour.
Oh no. That's so
Yeah,
stressful, man. Yeah, I've seen, like being a prog band means you have to do other things on top of, being a musician. And so I do sound at a number of local venues. And I've just seen it too many times where, a band rolls in with their laptop and something goes wrong, and now they can't play anything. And it's like, how embarrassing is that, where, you're playing these rooms in front of, 1,000 people, and your laptop goes down, and all of a sudden you can't play. Like, remember why we got into music was you picked up a guitar and you played it. It's like I never want to be in that position where if something went down, I wouldn't be able to play a set. I just think that's just too. Um, again, unless the genre requires it, like a lot of hip hop and pop music, that's part of the whole thing. But I
good
think
point.
progressive rock, there's athleticism involved in the musicality still. I think it's a lot of people who are into that kind of music are into it because of teetering on the tightrope kind of thing, right? You're right on the edge of your abilities, and if you're, if you can stop playing and the band is still rolling through the PA, I think,
Which
maybe.
yeah, and I'm interested that you had your rule, first of all, that you don't use click tracks. I wasn't aware you had this rule. What other rules do you have?
Um, it's got to sound good. It's got to be cool. I don't know. I think those are our main rules, right? Is like,
Yeah.
uh, just growing up and worshiping Genesis and Floyd and Yes and Rush and all of that stuff. I think well, Rush was they were never strangers to using tracks, right? I know they had the 2112 intro on a reel to reel that they would play from front of house, or the bird sounds on Xanadu, would be piped in. Um, but I think any sequences like on, Spirit of Radio or Vital Signs, like, if it started, somebody was triggering it with their foot and turning it off with their foot, and it wasn't just running, like a free running click. And that's something that we have taken on big time is following Rush's lead, not necessarily musically, but just from like a philosophy perspective of, if you're hearing it coming out of the speakers, somebody on stage is actually making it happen.
You mentioned you toured with Kiss, and I immediately thought of Rush because
Yeah.
it's known that early in their career they toured with Kiss. Now, did you guys actually meet the guys in Kiss?
Oh, yeah, dude. It's a crazy story, man. So I think this is gonna go back 4 or 5 years ago. We did a charity gig at Massey Hall for the Andy Kim Christmas. It's like an annual charity gig, and Alex Lifeson was playing it one year, and we were invited to join him on stage to do a couple of Zeppelin tunes. And so we did Stairway to Heaven and Battle of Evermore. And that was where we met Alex, and that was where we met Scully, who is Getty's longtime tech, and he was teching for Alex at the time. And Scully and I, we got to talking, and I think he was impressed because we were the only artists that were helping the techs schlep the gear, because that's just like how we operate, because we aren't, because like, and so Scully was, I think was impressed by that, and also, Cody's vocal prowess. And Alex was kind enough. He didn't want to play his 1275. He had his the Xanadu 1275 there, and he didn't want to play it, and so somebody had to do the 12 string part, and I was like, I'll do it. And he's like, cool, you can borrow my double neck. And I was like, wow, this is, it felt like the biggest moment where it felt like we truly arrived. And anyway, Scully and I got to talking, and like we live like 15 minutes away from each other. And so we've become really good friends over the years. And obviously, Gump, who was Neil's tech for years, became Eric Singer's drum tech, who has drummed for Kiss for 30 years now, 35 years now. And I guess a few years ago, Eric Singer stumbled on our Starlifter live performance video and was really impressed by it, and hit up Gump, was like, have you seen these guys? And he's like, yeah, like Scully texts for this band as well. And so through that, like, Eric got my phone number, and I get his phone number from LA, when I'm driving around in Canada, and I get, and it's like, hey man, it's Eric Singer from Kiss. Like, we love what you guys are doing. I sent the video to Gene and Paul. They're talking about getting you on the tour. And I was like, sure, of course, yeah, like whatever, not expecting it to actually happen. And then the next day our agents called, and they're like, oh yeah, we have the Kiss offer. And I was like, wow, it
Wow.
wasn't a prank call. That's really cool. And it's just amazing because these days in the state of arena touring, most bands that take support acts are thinking about splitting costs. It's like, okay, can this band like share crew? Are they willing to, like, kind of take that on, or are they going to sell tickets, right? And so that's why you see so many legacy bands that can't quite fill rooms that size are doing, like, really clever packages these days, right, to kind of insulate the risk of going on a tour of that level. Or it's the opposite, and they're just hitting up their agent saying, "Who's the cheapest band that we can take out?" kind of thing, right? What like that kind of situation never happens in the industry anymore. So it's just like it's not lost on us like how lucky we were to get that in those circumstances where this massive legacy band stumbles on a video of ours, thinks it's really cool, and they think that as a band like we're artistically interesting enough for to take us on the road. And the thing is like this is like what stand-up guys they are. Paul's son's band was touring with them, supporting them on the US leg of the tour. And that was going to be the plan for them to support them for the rest of the run. And they believed in us enough to say, sorry, Crownlands is going to open up for the Canadian dates. And they were, and like Paul's son's band was even on the road still. And they were just like hanging out, like eating the catering. And and they were really like gracious towards us. And so, again, it wasn't lost on us that they really they put a lot out to help us out. And um, a lot of the time, when you tour with bands, everyone is so busy and no one really makes time for each other. But the first day that we joined them on the road in Vancouver, like Gene, Paul, Eric, and Tommy, they all came up to us and we all had a really good time. They gave us they let us eat their catering every night, which was like steak dinners every night because it's Kiss, right? And they took care of us. They took care of the local crew and their on the road crew. I think it was the best tour we've ever done, and the fact that like every night Paul or Gene were coming up to us and telling us funny Rush stories was like it was really amazing, man. And um, yeah, they are just phenomenal human beings, and we've never been treated that well on the road before.
Hmm. And I wanted to ask you about touring. How do you feel about touring? Is it something you really dig your teeth into to it and love it, or is it something you dread to a degree? Or
We love it, man. Our management team, uh, they manage like Polyphia and a lot of other larger acts, and they've seen the writing on the wall for years, though. So every time we hit them up, we're like, we want to go on tour, we want to do the US, we want to do the UK, we want to do Europe, and we get met with like, you guys have no idea what it's actually like out there right now. And um, it can be really disheartening when you say you want to go on the road for 2 or 3 weeks and you get a budget back and you're like, you're going to lose $20,000 to do this tour. And I think the reality is as a Canadian artist, if you want to go over to Europe for 2 weeks, even with one crew member, you're going to be in about a $20,000 loss from flights, freighting gear, getting your carnets in order, getting your immigration papers, and like just being able to like bring your merch across borders and having to prepay the sales tax on all of those items before you've actually crossed the border. Same thing with going to the US, right? It's about a $20,000 investment to get an O visa these days, and about $10,000 if you want to get a temporary P visa. And so the Department of Homeland Security is so tight right now, and also politically, I mean, it's tricky,
yeah, yeah.
it's because like you don't know what's going to happen when you cross the border. And the best of times, right, if a border guard is in a bad mood, you're not getting across that day.
Mm,
And these days it's even riskier.
mhm.
So you have to outlay a lot of cash before you see a dime. And even then, like you're still seeing like guarantees that are the quarter the size of what they would be in Canada. And I think that's why you see what we call the Canadian curse, why you see so many bands that play theaters and arenas in Canada, they can't get arrested in Europe or America, right? And you see, so most of the bands that play arenas in Canada are playing clubs, like 200 cap clubs everywhere else in the world. The only band that I've actually seen transcend that is Rush.
Mhm.
Like maybe, I mean, you could make an argument for Nickelback as well. 3 Days Grace, maybe,
Mhm.
Billy
Mhm.
Talent for sure. But again, Billy Talent has um, had all their success in Europe as well, right? They still have a hard time in the US. Most bands do. It's because you have to outlay so much cash before you ever see a return. And I don't think you're
Mhm.
seeing labels supporting bands the same way. Like we were signed to Universal for a number of years. Like when Greta Van Fleet blew up about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we were signed to Universal on the back end of that. Like everything that happens every 10 years or so, you see a big spike, like when Tame Impala blew up, that's how you see, like um, what was it like, the Naked and Famous, MGMT, Tim Impala, that whole like indie psychedelic wave, kind of, blew up, and then the post Greta Van Fleet classic rock revival with, us and like Dirty Honey and so many other bands. Obviously, um, when our first record came out, it was like 2020, and COVID hit. So all of our international touring got kind of cut. And we struggled for a lot of years to like break out of that, and basically Universal like fronted a lot of the costs for us to go across the border, and and we hit UK a couple of times. We went down to America a few times, and we did these large arena tours with Greta Van Fleet and Primus and The Who, and we came home with like $40,000 losses, and basically, after our Fearless record came out, we were looking at it, and we owed Universal like probably $500,000, and
Mm.
there was kind of like this handshake agreement where it was like, hey, we aren't going to give you guys any more money, and we're like, hey, we can't keep operating like this. And so it was kind of like an amicable split. And so for a couple of years we were kind of wandering around the wilderness recording everything ourselves on our own budget, and then we hooked up with Inside Out last year, and now we're in this new deal, which is a lot more flexible. But of course, it's nothing's ever going to be the size of what it was being signed to Universals for tour support and everything, to be able to cover those ridiculous losses. And so if you ever see any bands that are like breaking through, it's because they have access to very large line of credit, or they have access to a very large record deal, because there's no other way you can tour, man. There's just, otherwise, you play the Canadian game of like getting factor grant funding, or playing municipal or provincial funded music festivals, right? And so that's why you see bands like Metric and Sam Roberts Band, and um, anything of that level, right? Where typically if they go on tour, they're hitting the ACC. But even at that level, the only way bands like that are making it work is a lot of those times is those big payday music festivals that are like, still funded by government, right? And we have to like recognize that like publicly funded music programs and like grant funding is still the only way that we're seeing art in Canada thrive. And if that goes away, like there is no more Canadian music industry. And so that's why it's so important for us to like, look at that as like something that is still, it's necessary, because otherwise there's, the cost of going anywhere else. Like it's too great, And so we're seeing like this huge scoop out of like the middle class of musicianship, just like because the music industry is a microcosm of the rest of our economy right now, right?
Hmm. Hmm. I find it's really interesting that you guys are very self-aware that you're a progressive rock band.
Oh yeah.
What's the landscape feel like to you? Like, because you're a younger guy. I remember when I got into prog, I was pretty young, and it was just 1980, and prog suddenly was not cool. The record
Yeah.
business didn't like prog. They didn't like prog bands. They wanted prog bands to change their format to shorter songs, et cetera, et cetera. And then slowly we had this revolution of prog, and you guys are riding that wave, I think. How does it feel to you as a prog artist, and probably you have lots of friends your age who are not into prog, maybe. I don't know. How's prog looking for you?
That's a good question. Yeah, like I mean, when I was like 16, I spent my weekends going to flea markets buying like old prog records, right? And this was before um, I think the resurgence of record stores and vinyl being like kind of the primary physical way that people purchased music. And so I would just go and buy the old first pressings of like Close to the Edge and Tales from Topographic Oceans. And then, when you go to those flea markets, it's all like these old record traders that are like, oh, the prog kid's coming here. Like we know we're gonna get $100 out of him this weekend. So it's like, hey man, you bought Relayer last weekend, this weekend you should go buy Going for the One, or maybe you need to get Selling England by the Pound. And so I built my collection like that. And I had a big jam space in my parents had an unfinished basement, as, like a lot of us did, and had a drum kit and all my, I would just go on Kijiji or Craigslist and buy as many broken old synthesizers and Hammond organs that I could off of, my part-time jobs, and fill the basement with old analog gear, and then throw on Emerson, Lake and Palmer cranked, and everyone's, like listening to that for inspiration. And so, culturally, I had like this niche circle of people in high school that we were all into like fusion and prog, but it was never, um, it was a very small niche, and it still is very much, right? I think it's really cool to see a resurgence of progressive leaning music. I think over the last few years, Black Midi had a huge breakthrough. Um, and again, even Greta Van Fleet, right? A lot of their music, even though I'd say it's more of a psychedelic rock kind of thing, I think some of their music has been touted as, like leaning more into that. And then when we toured with them, we saw this huge surge of these young kids, like 16-year-old, girls that are like talking to us about Rush and Yes. And I think, us getting in front of that audience and, putting out 19-minute singles about, outer space battles, I think like, inspires that. And, things like mainstream media like Stranger Things, getting people into things like Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games and being more interested in fantasy, I think has been great. And also, I think just we owe how grim the reality is for a lot of people right now, like politically around the world. And I think people are looking for something a little bit more fantastical, a little bit more escapism in their music. And I think the grand storytelling elements of progressive rock have that, the way that a record can give you a world that you can dive into and escape, um, what we're seeing every day, I think is really important. And um, yeah, like when we started, we made a conscious effort to try and write like shorter, more radio friendly music, because I saw the landscape in Canada especially, and I understood that there's like six program directors for active rock radio in the entire country, and it's a very small world that you want to get into. And so we made a concerted effort on our earlier works to um, get on the radio. And independently, I think we hit like 18 on the charts with our song Waterfall, and that like started a big bidding war for us. And that in conjunction with with Greta blowing up and Dirty Honey and like this whole kind of groundswell of that like heavier rock. And we were kind of following bands like Monster Truck at that time. And so we saw that and we jumped on it, but then all of a sudden we realized like the game that we were playing was like kind of soul crushing. And so we said, fuck it, like we want to do the music we want to do. And so we made our first 7-minute song, Context Fearless Part 1 with Terry Brown. And then we ended up redoing a lot of that with Nick Raskulinecz. And that was the first time we actually saw any kind of mainstream real success where, we're getting on Rolling Stone magazine, and we were getting, on all the Rush blogs and all of that. And we realized like, oh, we finally just did what we wanted to do. And that was our first big breakthrough moment. And so that just gave us the confidence to be like, this is where we're going, and then Fearless was a really big watershed moment for us where, we opened up with an 18-minute song, and our A&R guy at the label at the time, Sean Marino, who's an amazing guy, like he's the coolest guy. He came to our studio session the first time, sat in front of our piano and played Firth the Fifth by Genesis. I'm like, this is the guy I will gladly listen to when he tells us, maybe you should get to the chorus a little bit sooner, right? Like an awesome, awesome human. And I love Sean. And, I remember he called us when we delivered Starlifter, and he's like, you want this to be the first track on the album, don't you? And I'm like, yes. He's like, and you want this to be your first single? And we're like, yes. He's like, I get it. And again, there was like that understanding of like very similar to 2112, like when we delivered that to the label, we're like, where was the understanding that, okay, this is our last major label release, and we were okay with it, and they were okay with it, and they helped us, see it through. But of course, now we're with a label that is a lot more suited to those ambitions, right? Like Thomas and everyone else at Inside Out, I think, is a lot more understanding to 19-minute songs rather than something like Universal. And it's been really nice to kind of have like a home of everyone who understands that sort of music now. Um, but yeah, I think I'm seeing a huge groundswell of progressive leading bands because like if I'm not producing a Crownlands record, I'm producing a lot of other prog bands. And being from the West Coast, I'm sure you know a band called Brass Camel. And
I sort of was introduced to them through your what's it called? Instagram.
yeah,
And
they're
I saw some clips and I said, "Well, I haven't heard of these guys, so I'm going to actually dig into their music soon." Yeah.
yeah, you should check them out, man. They're really cool. They're like um, there's a lot of funk in their music, a lot of Frank Zappa, a lot of Rush, a lot of Floyd, a lot of Gentle Giant. I hear a lot of Gentle Giant in their music. And so I produced their last record for them, and Terry Brown mixed it. And it's a killer album, and that's going to be coming out very soon. And I've produced this other band from Brooklyn, New York, called the Moon City Masters, and they're another like I don't know how to describe them. They've got like a lot of Toto in them, a lot of Boston, again a lot of Rush and Yes, and like very like that kind of like 80. I like to describe this like one of my favorite eras of music is 70s guitar band discovers the synthesizer. Like if you listen to Hot Space by Queen or Signals by Rush or 1984 by Van Halen, where you hear like those super heavy analog synths and drum machines like paired with distorted guitars and still like that, that hangover of the late 70s in terms of songwriting. I just love that era of music, and Moon City Masters embody that, and that's a killer record too.
Hmm.
And basically, yeah, there's a lot of really good progressive rock coming out of Scandinavia. There's Hallis. I don't know if you've gotten into them, but their new record opens up with a 20-minute song called "Above the Continuum," and it's killer. There's kind of like hints of like Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis, but then they go into like twin guitar mini leads, like that kind of very like like the way a Swedish band would, right? That's like really clever harmony. The vocalist, I hate to be reductive when you say X band sounds like X band, but the vocalist really does conjure early Peter Gabriel in terms of like that vocal range, which is I think Peter Gabriel's my favorite vocalist of all time. He just captures like that, that I just love him. And Hallis is one of my favorite bands going right now. If you listen, also another Swedish band, Ghost.
Yeah.
Like if they embody like that proggy '80s AOR thing, and again, like I love that sound of like that '70s guitar band discovers the synth right on the last
Yeah.
two records they've done are just fantastic. And
Yeah.
Dan Malsh and Andy Wallace are two of my favorite mixing engineers, and the mixes that they've put out on the last couple records, they just sound amazing. And big fan of everything Ghost does, especially for that again the theatricality of it all. So it's really great bands out there, man.
Yeah. And I noticed in your bio, I knew you were from Ontario. But it says you were from Oshawa. Both you guys from Oshawa?
Originally, yep, yep.
Right.
I grew up in a town called Whitby, which is right next to Oshawa. It would be like I don't know if you were from Surrey and you say, "Oh, I'm from Surrey." No, it's like, are you really from Surrey, Vancouver, kind of thing, right? It's kind of like a similar thing. And yeah, and so the band came out of Oshawa, which being a GM town, which is and then all of a sudden the entire auto industry collapsed, and I think it was a place where people were struggling there for a long time, and now it's kind of rebranded itself more as a university and a college town, and I think it's working out. But there was a really strong music scene in the dirty rock clubs there for a long time, and that's kind of how we came up. But we didn't belong anywhere, right? Everyone in that scene were playing like death metal, and we were showing up playing this shimmering prog rock kind of stuff, and so we did not fit in there. But everyone was still, gracious enough towards us.
And when did you become conscious of Rush? Because it seems to me that's probably would you say that's one of your favorite prog bands?
Oh, easy. Yeah, they're still my favorite band ever. I was 14 years old, and I downloaded my uncle's iTunes account for, like back in the day when you could like share like, music like that. And so I downloaded like a bunch of his music because like he was into, Rush and all that stuff. And so the first Rush album I ever heard was The Farewell to Kings, because it was back in the day, like iPods would organize the music alphabetically.
Hmm.
And so the first album that would come up was Farewell to Kings. And I just remember, being 14 years old and like putting my headphones on and riding my bike around and listening to, that for the first time. And I think it was, before then I was playing bass, and I was mostly influenced by bands like Green Day, because, being like, I started playing bass when I was 12 and I heard Holiday by Green Day on the radio, and I just loved that bass tone on the bridge. And so I bugged my parents for a bass guitar, and they gave me one for Christmas when I was, yeah, like 11 or 12, I think. And I was really, and then, but as a bass player, start getting, I got into Primus and Les Claypool and Victor Wooten. And then it's like you start finding their influences. And of course, I found out like Les Claypool's favorite bass player was Geddy Lee. And so I downloaded that Rush album. And um, it was the first time I think I ever really registered what a synthesizer was on a Farewell to Kings too. And I was like, it just sounded so magical, and especially coming from a lot of like punk and alternative music in the 90s, which was so anti-keyboard. And then hearing those Taurus pedals on Xanadu and hearing the birds chirping, it just really captured my imagination that nothing else had. And also it just became like it was like an addiction where it's like you have to find, that was like the entrance to the rabbit hole. It's like, oh, if you like Rush, you need to go to the source code, which is yes. And then I remember hearing Heart of the Sunrise for the first time and being like,
Mm.
oh my God. It's just like I had never heard music that sounded so rich and colorful before. And then Rick Wakeman like quickly became my favorite musician. And then I was like, discovered all of his music, like Six Wives of Henry VIII. And all of a sudden I was pouring myself, I moved away from being a bass player more into a keyboard player, and I spent all my time and money. Like I've got my Mini Moog right here, which is like my favorite instrument ever, and like that was, I spent like my whole life working towards being able to have one of those. And it all started with hearing A Farewell to Kings for the first time when I was 14. And, then of course my dad would come down and he's like, oh, you're listening to this, you need to check out King Crimson, you need to check out Mahavishnu Orchestra. And so I got into John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham. And then of course then you fall into the rabbit hole of fusion. And I got into Chick Corea and Return to Forever, um and then of course Brand X with Phil Collins on drums. And then all of a sudden I was like, whoa. And then you get into Genesis, and the rabbit hole grows ever deeper and ever deeper. And then before you realize it, you've listened to 30 Frank Zappa bootlegs and you're the weirdest kid in your school and no one understands what you're talking about. And then
Yeah.
lucky enough, I found Cody. And I met Cody when I was 19. And so, like, I went to Western University and I studied classical music there for a year. But then I realized, again, like being like, like a middle class kid, like I was paying for it myself using OSAP, right? And I was looking at it and I was like, I'm going to owe $150,000 on a degree by the end of this. And all I'm going to be able to do is teach music in a public school system. And I do love teaching music. I still do that on the side. But it was one of those things. And like, I think I just read too much Jack Kerouac at the time because I was obsessed with King Crimson. And of course, Beat, that album, changed my life because, and then of course, through that album, I went and read everything by Jack Kerouac when I was like 19 in university. And I was like, oh, I need to go and do this for real. And so like I bought a backpack and I hitchhiked to California. And I joined a reggae band there. And like I learned so much playing with these guys. I was playing keyboards with in a reggae band in California for like 6 months. And then of course being a Canadian, you can only stay there for 6 months until you have to go and redo your immigration. And so like I went back up to Canada, and a friend of mine while I was up there said, "Oh, there's this band I'm auditioning for. You should come meet them. I hear they're big Rush fans." And I met Cody at the audition, who was playing drums in this band. And it was really funny because I mentioned to Cody, the first thing I said to them, I was like, "You sound exactly like Bill Bruford." And Cody's like, "Oh, who's Bill Bruford?" Because Cody's favorite band was Rush at the time too. And I was like, "Dude, listen to Discipline by King Crimson." And because it's like there's like certain like chops, again, like Cody always had, would always turn the snare off and use this, and use like a high tom as almost the way you would as a ride, just like Bill Bruford would on that record, right? And there's almost no cymbals on those albums. And Cody was like, I can't listen to this. This gives me a headache. And then, of course, after 4 or 5 more listens, Cody's like, oh my God, I get it. This is some of the craziest music I've ever heard. And um, a couple of years ago, we played a show in Bahrain for the Formula One after party, and Nick Mason was there. And Nick Mason came backstage, and the first thing Nick said to Cody was like, yo, you drum a lot like my friend Bill Bruford. And it was like this amazing full circle moment where one of the first things I ever said to Cody was like, you drum like Bill. And then,
Hmm.
of course, like Nick, who grew up with Bill, because all those guys had that scene. I just thought it was so interesting that the first thing Nick said is like, yeah, of course, yeah, you sound like Bill Bruford, which is so cool because Cody really does have that certain quality to the drumming, which I don't hear a lot of people who kind of like go to that, because not a lot of prog drummers play very straight. Don't A lot of them don't have that kind of like, again, like I hear one rim shot and I'll know if it's Bill Bruford or not, right? He just has like that certain, that groove. And yeah, so when I met Cody and I heard that, I was like, I went to my parents' place. And I was like, I found my drummer. I found the guy I'm going to play with for like the rest of my life, and like 10 years later, man, we're still doing this crazy thing and somehow avoiding getting real jobs, and so
Well, I hope this goes on as long as possible.
thanks, man. Me too, man.
Because I think because of I think certain prog bands sort of become like anchors, and they sort of spawn confidence in other bands, and they say, "Hey,
Yeah,
listen to what the music they're making. I kind of want to make music like that." I think, like, I'm very encouraged by your music. Of course, I did a reaction to the Apocalypse single.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, I saw you, and also you did Lady a couple of years ago. So again, Dean, thank you so much for supporting us and talking about new prog. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well, I gave up on prog in the 90s. I really did think that, other than Rush, of course, Rush was they were no matter what, they just kept trudging forward. But I really thought prog was over, and then kind of actually I discovered Tool.
Yeah,
I was going to say too. I mean, you mentioned you're not really prog metal. You guys are more like sort of like the more classic prog, heavy rock prog, I would say. And
yeah.
the fact that you guys are a duo, I mean that's really amazing that just two of you guys are playing together. Does it feel like uh, complete to you, or do you feel like, oh, I think we need someone else in the band? How is?
That's like it's an ever evolving conversation, dude.
Mm,
I have really wanted to treat Crown Lands for a long time, almost as like kind of like Mars Volta. You know how like that band is like Cedric and Omar plus a revolving door of just ridiculously talented musicians that like kind of orbit them. And I
yeah.
would love eventually to treat the band like that. Or, I love that symphonic prog thing. And our big breakthrough record was Fearless. And that was when I said, screw it, I'm going to overdub bass and keyboards here. And because before that, we had that rule of if we can't play it live, it's not on the record. Whereas that album and Apocalypse have been records where like we're going to be the best Crownlands cover band. We're going to make the album sound exactly the way we want it to sound, and we will figure out how to pull it off live later. You know, and so that has given us the freedom to, I think, make records that sound a lot closer to what we've always wanted to hear. But it's given us a whole new challenge of like, how do we actually pull this off without using tracks? And so having my custom double necks helps because like you just kind of pick who the hero is at a moment, right? Like, is the bass riff more important? Is the guitar riff more important? Um, or am I gonna, there's a couple of moments where I have to like tap the guitar with my left hand, play a bass part with my right foot, play a keyboard part with my right hand, and it's like, rubbing your tummy and scratching your head or vice versa. It's definitely there's a lot of rehearsing that goes into it. And I think we are very much reaching that point where we have to treat the band the way Talking Heads treated their band in Stop Making Sense, where it was modular, right? And you'd have, that's one of my favorite live performance films ever, where it starts off just with David Byrne, and by the fifth song, you've got this 10-piece Afro-Cuban fusion band playing new wave, and it's just like some of the most interesting things ever, right? Or again, like I really do love like, that early 80s era where prog bands were like, discovering kind of like world music, right? When Peter Gabriel discovered Usador and, brought him along for the So tour, or again, or 80s Genesis when they found their Chester Thompson and their Daryl Strummer. And we are very much doing that now, where actually on Friday, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but on Friday, we are releasing a live performance video of Apocalypse, where um, one of these bands that I produced, this band called the Dreamland Band, there's fantastic progressive rock band from Hamilton, and live they are a four-piece. But the songwriting is very much like us, where there's two guys in the band, Dan Walton and Adam Inrig, where Dan plays guitar and bass and sings. Adam plays drums, but he's also a fantastic keyboard player. And both these guys studied jazz in university. And they're big Genesis guys, where, we've got Adam who plays drums, but he studied everything by Tony Banks, and he can sit there and play, the big, the In the Cage or It, like, no problem. And I'm like, these are my people. So when I produced a record for them this year, and I showed them Apocalypse, and their question was like, how are we going to pull this off live? And I floated the idea to them. I was like, would you guys be interested in joining us on stage, for a couple of the songs that we struggle with, translating? And so they've agreed, and so we've gone in and we filmed a performance where it's kind of, again, it's very 80s Genesis in the way that we have like the two drum kits, and then Adam's got a keyboard rig to play stuff that like I can't pull off when I'm busy playing guitar. And so Dan is playing bass, I'm playing guitar, and Cody is doing drums, and then doing the Phil Collins thing of running from the kit to fronting the band. But we've also got this extra theatrical element where, of course, the story of Apocalypse is, the story of Captain Blackstar showing up to Fearless's planet and wiping out these dragon riders and, colonizing the planet, only to come back to his own planet to find a civil war has broken out. And, the infighting that has resulted is the idea that violence begets violence, hate begets hate. And it's very much like an analogy for what we're seeing around the world today. And so we've got like, the costumes where myself and the rest of the band, we're all dressed up as the dragon riding, people, and Cody is dressed up as Captain Blackstar. And it's very much like that kind of theatrical 70s Genesis thing with the outfit changes and the, and the costumes and everything. But with that 80s Genesis, like that kind of punch thing that they had too. And so I'm really excited for that to come out to the world, because um, being a band that can be divisive, like obviously online, like that's like a really good thing. So when people hit us up and they're like, you sound too much like Rush, I hate you, or you don't sound enough like Rush, I hate you, or I hate you because you don't have a bass player, or I hate you
Right.
because blah blah blah, right? And I think it's really good to like, you're doing something right if you're reaching people that are upset about random stuff.
Right.
And I'm really excited for this video to come out, because a lot of people can be like, I don't like you anymore, you're no longer, a strict duo. Or people will be like, oh, thank God you finally got, finally Cody's fronting the band, or finally you've got a bass player joining us, or whatever. And again, like, so we're going on a headline tour, and we're hitting all the soft seat theaters in Ontario. We're doing these beautiful performing arts centers, and we're going to open up with some of the ritual music, like the ambient world music that we put out last year, to represent the planet before the arrival of the syndicate, to represent the piece. And we're going to be dressed up in like these druid robes, and we're going to have all this green foliage, and and then all of a sudden, the stage lights go out, and then Cody and I are going to do a duo set, and we're going to open up with Starlifter and do like that whole thing. And so that way you get like I call it like the circus act, where it's like, wow, look at everything they can do with two people. But something I've struggled with a lot is, a lot of the time people say Crownlands is good for a duo. And I want the music to be good, period. I don't want there to be a disclaimer. I don't, oh yeah, they're pretty good for two people, if only they had X amount of members. And so we do a whole set as a duo, because it's something that we can do it with our eyes closed at this point, with something we know that we can kind of rely on each other to, carry it through. And then for some of the newer, more challenging material like Apocalypse, that's the second set after an intermission. And again, we change the set design of the stage and everything, and we bring people to the planet of the syndicate. And then, we do the theatrical changes. And then we do like a full, like 80s Genesis four band thing, where Cody is, kind of fronting the band just like Phil Collins. And we have her Chester Thompson now and her Daryl Strummer. And so that way we can really build it out. And again, going back to Talking Heads Stop Making Sense, where, it's, when you have Bernie Worrell on keys and you're just like, hell yeah, dude. And so we really want to like turn that up and be able to have those elements of like, we can be a prog band, we can have, or a prog duo, depending on how it is, and that gives us that flexibility, and if we're headlining, we can do those evening with things and tell the entire story of this story that we've been building across multiple albums now.
It's interesting you mentioned social media because I grew up in the days when bands were like gods, they're like de deities. Like
Yeah.
you'd never imagine them just sitting in their kitchen with a coffee and chatting with their phone and their audience, which is how it kind of happens nowadays. There's much less of a barrier between you and your fans, and I guess if you're sensitive too. I mean, who isn't sensitive if you pour your soul into something and somebody sort of trashes it, and it's
Oh,
so
dude, it's so
easy.
funny. Yeah, like when
Yeah.
we put Apocalypse up, like the first comment was like, there's better prog out there. And so I just responded like genuinely. It was like, okay, like where is it? Like I'm not, it's like I want to know, like where is the better prog? And then the guy's like, oh, you mentioned it was Beardfish, which is a sick band, but like they started 30 years ago. They're not a new band anymore. So it's like, but again, like, but it's like, whatever, right? So, but I do think it's funny where, how mean people can be on the internet and people are like, oh, fuck these guys. I hate them. And I'll just like chime in and be like, you're talking to a human right now. You realize that, right? Like, like I'm right here looking at all your comments, right? So it's like you can read like 1,000 comments of like, oh, you guys are so good, oh, you're carrying the torch of Rush, blah blah blah, and like Getty and Alex, like I've met them, I've worked with them, they're amazing humans, and they've given us like their blessing and everything. They're amazing guys, and that doesn't matter because it's like if you read one comment, you're like, you guys kind of suck. You're like, that's the one comment you read, and that's the one comment that you hold in your heart all day, and you're like, what are you doing, man? Like sometimes like you just got to get off the internet and play. It's
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing, like balancing it all right now, and like how accessible do you be on the internet? Like, and I think
Mhm.
something I've found is, um, the earnestness of the prog community is special. And I think like they're like they're we all have to stick together. But I also have to say like the particularities of the prog community is funny because like you go on these prog forums and be like, oh, you know what, like I don't even like Close to the Edge. It's overrated. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like I think there's a lot of like this like weird possessiveness in the prog community, and but it's still my favorite genre of music, and I think it needs to be cherished and it needs to be carried on, and it's really nice to see how many cool new bands are doing it, right? Like have you gotten into Elder, Dean?
No.
They're sick. They're awesome. They started out as total sludge metal, and every album they release gets more progressive rock. But I
Oh.
know what you mean. Like there was a long time where prog rock couldn't be found. It was all prog metal, right? Like you say, you grew up. It's like if you were really, like you're probably like I don't know, like maybe 25, 30 years older than me, maybe. Like I don't know, like how
I don't know how old you are. I was
I'm
born in
I'm
1968. I was born in 68.
Okay, cool. I was born
Yeah.
in 94. So yeah, so
Okay.
yeah. And so like
Yeah.
I kind of came up like in, I'd say like my formative years were like 2012, 2013, right? So for you they're probably like around like 90 something, right? So
Yeah.
there's there's kind of like a long period where prog rock did not exist and any progressive music was prog metal. And it doesn't have that same color palette, I think. I think everything got a little bit darker, which I
Hmm.
understand. Um, but for so long, like that feeling you get when you put on Close to the Edge or Heart of the Sunrise or And You and I, like that rich Technicolor tapestry, I think was missing from a lot of progressive music for a long time. And I think it's coming back, right? There's a fantastic band from Norway called Wobbler, and then
Oh
there's
yeah.
another like they're amazing. And like
Yeah.
Chronicles of Father Robin, right, which is like the super group of Wobbler and a couple other Norwegian prog bands. So much cool, yeah. It's fantastic, and I think that was, yeah, that was missing from the world for a really long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's nice that yeah, it's nice that there's a lot of bands kind of carrying that on and pushing it forward too.
Do you do a lot of reading in your spare time?
Um, I try to. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's only so much, you know. Right now I'm reading a lot of Midi manuals. But you know, I try and, you
Riveting.
know, read. Yeah, it is actually. I try to read and reread, you know, a lot of you know, Lord of the Rings. Like Tolkien's a big one in our house, and Cody's a big, you know, Dune fan. Um, but yeah, like I feel like some of my favorite authors are still going to be like the beat poets. You know, Jack Kerouac, I think, is my favorite author of all time, man. Like he just capture, you know. But yeah, I love a lot of like American authors. Steinbeck rules. Um, yeah, I love Douglas Adams, man.
Oh,
I like that.
Adams.
Like, yeah, I like the levity that he has.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Kurt Vonnegut's great too. I've been reading Trials of Jupiter, which is the book that actually inspired Ewan McGregor um to travel around the world in his motorcycle.
Mhm.
It's really like I don't know if you ever saw like the long way round when Charlie Borman and Ewan McGregor actually rode their motorcycles like all across like Europe, and they actually helped map out Kazakhstan. Like this is going back like
Mm.
after Ewan McGregor got like his fuck you money from Phantom Menace. He's like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna ride around the world on my motorcycle with my best friend. And so
Mm.
they actually did, and they rode like the road of bones through Russia, and they you know, this is before GPS units and everything, so they actually helped map out Kazakhstan by doing this. Pretty remarkable. And then they rode all the way to the tip of Russia in Siberia, and then they took a ferry from Russia to Alaska, and then they rode all the way from Alaska to New York. And that's, you know, like so the guy who actually he originally like he rode his motorcycle from the UK all the way through India and everything in the 70s. And it's just remarkable because this is like right after like the Yom Kippur War. And so like the Middle East and, you know, was not a good place to be, you know, as an Englishman. And so his travels are amazing, just riding around on his old Triumph Tiger through the desert. And like that's inspired me a lot because I mean, if I'm not, you know, like I mean, being a Canadian, it's tough, but like I ride my motorcycle like every second I can, and that kind of gives me just as much joy, if not more, than playing my guitar.
Yeah, I forgot. I saw some pictures of you with the motorcycle. That's cool.
Yeah, it's the best. Like I understand why so many musicians. Oh, I think like a lot of musicians are undiagnosed like ADHD, where you're missing a lot of your dopamine. You know, like you need to get it however. And I think a lot of artists, you know, jump on their, you know, do whatever they can, like with risk-taking behavior back in the day, if artists were, you know, getting up to no good with substances. But obviously these days, budgets have changed and no one
Hmm.
has any
Yeah.
money to do anything fun. But that's the great thing about a motorcycle, you know, for a couple of grand, you can buy yourself a bike and you can take it anywhere, and it's just an instant smile. And, you know, that's kind of what it's all about, right? In this life is finding, you know, finding as much life as you can in every year that you know that passes. So
I just flipped through some of your Instagram and I noticed there was a picture of you with a girl and it looked like you guys maybe are newlyweds and it looks like she's an artist herself.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, my wife, her name is Kaylin McGee, and she's an amazing artist. It's kind of like she puts me in my place because like I'll be sitting here in the studio with Cody for like 3 hours, 4 hours, trying to come up with some new stupid riff in 7/8 and 11/8, and you know how it is as a prog musician, you know. And then I'll come home and be like, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" She's like, "Oh, I just wrote like 3 songs," and I'm like, "Fuck," like you know. And it's like it's amazing what you can do around G, C, and D chords if you're writing folk music. And
Mhm.
you have a, you know, she's just a fantastic lyricist, and she's actually got a concept album coming out in April, and it's about the witches of the woods in Germany. And there's like all these legends around the Black Forest, like fairies that she's been reading about, and so she's kind of translated all of these like old German folk tales into like this amazing concept record. And it's very like the production's kind of very Jethro Tull. And again, like I've produced and mixed that record for her as well. And of course, in the meantime, she's written another concept album about like all of the misunderstood mythological monsters of Greek mythology and like the tragic story behind the Minotaur and the tragic story behind Medusa and all of these characters that we
Hmm.
grow up thinking are monsters. And so she's really like she's really on all of this stuff, and it's like it just kind of blows my mind. And it's great because it's like this kind of like healthy I can't say competition, but like it's like yeah, like I'll be here all day like writing these concept records with Cody, and then I come home to Kaylin, and she's got her own concept album. So it's like I don't really have any off time, to be honest. I'm just always working on music, and it's always weird conceptual stuff. Because if I'm not working on Crownlands, I'm helping her, and if I'm not doing that, I'm producing another record. And I've made this rule like I only produce records for bands that do prog. I'm really lucky to kind of be in this position, and then if I'm not doing that, I'm probably teaching music, I'm sure as an artist yourself, that's kind of like all you do. And it's kind of funny, like I think I've said this to you before, but over the pandemic there were a couple of yes little licks that I was trying to figure out, and I just googled it and your videos popped up, and like a lot of your stuff has helped me kind of figure out some Steve Howe isms, right? Like on
Yeah.
long distance runaround, or I think what was it? It was Circumstances by Rush, right? I remember I was trying to figure out a couple of chords, and I saw your video. I don't know, this must be going back like 4 years ago, maybe 5 years
Oh
ago when you
yeah,
posted
at
that.
least, yeah.
Yeah.
Five, six
Yeah,
years
so
ago even, yeah.
it's just mind blowing that so thank you for doing those things and posting those kind of how to's, because there's not a lot of that for progressive rock out there, and it's hard enough figuring that kind of stuff out yourself. So thanks for putting out those kinds of resources, man.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so happy it was useful to you and to, to anyone. Yeah, that's what how my channel started actually. I was focused on guitar, and then I thought, well, I might as well teach guitar lessons because I love my favorite guitarists, Alex Lifeson and Steve Howe are my favorite guitarists without a doubt. I
Good
actually
taste,
met,
Dean.
yeah, I met Steve Howe too. It was really cool. Down in a Tim Hortons in the United States of all places. And he was more interested in the girls that were at the table that I was sitting with. So,
Oh my God,
I
it's so
mean,
funny, eh?
I
Like
could have just
it's
rolled with
still a
that.
70s rock style,
Yeah,
eh?
yeah. And then I gave him a little fist pump, you know. But just the
Yeah.
fact that I my hand touched the hand that made close to the edge and roundabout and like every piece of music, I couldn't believe it. I actually met him. I was so
Aw,
excited.
that's
So
so funny, man.
you've met Alex Lifeson. I'm envious of that, or Geddy Lee as well. That's really exciting.
They're great humans, man. Alex is like just like so generous with his time and his energy, man. He's a really good dude,
And
and
he's so hilarious too. He's like a
he
comedian.
he is. He's such a funny guy. Yeah, yeah. It's tricky. Yeah, it's like when you meet those guys and they just want to be like, God, you know how much your music means to me, kind of thing. But like, it's like I try. You got to play it cool.
Yeah.
I,
Well,
d-
we've been
I'm bad at that though. I just
what?
want to be like, Alex, tell me about every chorus pedal you've ever used. And then like he's a gearhead too. And so like, like he'll nerd out with me, and I'll be like, yeah,
Really?
so oh yeah, like
Nice.
he's great about that.
That's awesome. Well, I was just looking at the time, 107 we've been talking. I don't know how much time you budgeted, but I'm sure you got things to
I
do
should I
and
should I should probably get going pretty soon, man. Yeah, I've got it. I just saw my phone's down to 10%, and I've still
uh-oh.
got to do some MIDI programming here before we go fly over to Cruise to the Edge.
Yeah.
It's a big endeavor,
Yeah.
programming everything so that way I can fly with a much smaller rig, and I don't have to fly with my giant Taurus pedals, and it's
Yeah.
like my safety blanket is my Taurus pedals, but I'm using was like the Roland PK5s, like the MIDI pedals, and I'm just going to use
Mhm.
like a Minotaur as the brain, but I got to program all of my sounds into that bad boy today. So
Well, if you're ever in town, I'd love to have you over for dinner. I used to be a chef for 10 years.
sick. I'd love that, man.
Yeah, maybe you've heard. I lived in London, Ontario, and I worked in
Yeah,
Ingersoll. You know Ingersoll, Ontario?
I do. Yeah,
Elmhurst Inn. I worked there. I've worked at Toronto, Harbor Castle. Yeah, I'd love to cook you guys a real home cooked meal if you're ever in town.
I'd love
Consider
that,
it an
man.
invite.
Oh, we will be. Oh, definitely. I think we're going to be coming out west this year, so that
Oh,
would be
that'd be
great, man.
great. That'd be great. Okay,
Sick.
well, yeah, so appreciate your time and
You
all the
too,
best
man.
to you and your endeavors. And I'm a new fan now. It's really clicked for me. I at first I wasn't so sure about your band, but after reacting to this song and the new album, I am just like locked
Oh,
in. I'm locked in,
thanks,
man.
man. Yeah, maybe that's a sign of good prog, right?
Oh yeah.
it's like it's like a acquired taste, right? Like the first time I heard Close to the Edge, I didn't know what to think about it, and it's like you gotta, repeat a listen. So you know what? I'll send you a link for the whole album. I'd love to hear what you think, man.
Okay. I'll do a review of it. Great.
Awesome, that'd be great, man. All right,
All
Dean,
right.
take care, buddy. Thank you so much for
You
your time,
too.
man.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay. Cheers.
bye.
Bye.